Hi class. For this week, we're going to be reading a short essay by Gary Soto, Like Mexicans. Gary Soto is a writer who grew up here in Fresno, where I'm from actually, and he has written several essays about Mexican culture, about growing up in the valley here. And so we're going to be learning from Gary Soto this week. We're going to be reading him rhetorically. So again, we're thinking about his audience and trying to determine how he's connecting with that audience. What is he needing to provide in order to establish that connection throughout? How does he engage you as a reader? What are some of the strategies, some of the rhetorical strategies that he's using to keep you hooked throughout? And this essay also talks about a particular community, a particular cultural community, his Mexican family. And so in this particular discourse community, we're also learning about the values of his mother that's been passed on throughout the extended family, as well as learning about some of the struggles he's dealing with, sort of deviating from what his mother expects of him. And so I'm going to be reading several paragraphs of this particular essay, and I'll be analyzing the rhetorical choices that he's making and the impact it's having on the essay itself as well as his readers. And your job will be to finish reading the essay and then to leave audio comments and commenting on the very things that I'm talking about. So I'm going to be going paragraph to paragraph in the first page here, talking about his choices that he's making. And so your job will be to go and finish the rest of the essay, reading it to yourself, and then doing as I'm doing here, commenting on the strategies that he's choosing. And then also, in addition, I would like for you to do is to answer any two of these questions at the bottom here for discussion, as well as any of these two questions regarding strategies and structures. Okay, so you'll be doing as I'm doing, so I'm going to be modeling that for you in terms of talking about the individual paragraphs. So again, you're going to finish it, and then you're going to answer two questions for each of those sections. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit of this out loud. My grandmother gave me bad advice and good advice when I was in my early teens. For the bad advice, she said that I should become a barber because they make good money and listen to the radio all day. Honey, they don't work como burros, she would say every time I visited her. She made the sound of donkeys braying. Like that, honey. For the good advice, she said that I should marry a Mexican girl. No okis, hijo, she would say. Look, my son, he married one and they fight every day about I don't know what and I don't know what. For her, everyone who wasn't Mexican, black, or Asian were okis. The French were okis, the Italians in suits were okis. When I asked about Jews, whom I had read about, she asked for a picture. I rode home on my bicycle and returned with a calendar depicting the important races of the world. Pues sí, son okis también, she said, nodding her head. She waved the calendar away, and we went to the living room where she lectured me on the virtues of the Mexican girl. First, she could cook, and second, she acted like a woman, not a man, in her husband's home. She said she would tell me about a third when I got a little older. So in this very first paragraph, we can see that right away he introduces his grandmother, giving him good advice and bad advice. So right away, the reader is like, what is this good advice and what is this bad advice? And also there is this sort of trope in our culture of the grandmother, respecting the grandmother and the grandmother being the wise one. And so he's also playing with that trope as well. And then right away, we also get to hear the grandmother. We get to know a little bit about her, and we hear some of her values coming through, right? So we have her work values that he should work like a barber, and he wouldn't have to work as hard como burros. And so many Mexican immigrants who have come to California have had to work in the fields, and it is back-breaking work. And so she is wanting more for her grandson. to be able to work indoors in a place with air conditioning where he wouldn't have to be bent over all day trying to pick lettuce and strawberries and blueberries and so forth. And then we also hear her talking about Okies, and he's basically telling him he can't marry a white girl. And so he's received this advice, and we don't even have yet his ideas about it. We're only hearing her. We get this scene with them in the kitchen. And then he goes and talks to his mother. Asked my mother about it, becoming a barber and marrying Mexican. She was in the kitchen, steam curled from a pot of boiling beans. The radio was on, looking as squat as a loaf of bread. Well, if you want to be a barber, they say they make good money. She slapped a round steak with a knife, her glasses slipping down with each strike. She stopped and looked up. If you find a good Mexican girl, marry her, of course. She returned to slapping the meat, and I went to the backyard where my brother and David King were sitting on the lawn, feeling the inside of their cheeks. And so in this moment, we go now to a different generation. So we're seeing here compare contrast between these different spaces. And we can see that the mother has still embraced the values of marrying a Mexican girl, but she decides, like, if you want to be a barber, sure, that's good. You can make good money doing that. But she's not insisting on it. There isn't that cultural pressure, unlike other groups, like in the Indian culture, for instance, where adult males are often expected to be doctors or lawyers. And so he's sort of getting validation from his mother about this advice. And now he goes to basically to his peers, to his siblings. This is what girls feel like, my brother said, rubbing the inside of his cheek. David put 3 fingers inside his mouth and scratched. I ignored them and climbed the back fence to see my best friend, Scott, a second-generation Okie. I called him, and his mother pointed to the side of the house where his bedroom was, a small aluminum trailer, the kind you gawk at when they're flipped over on the freeway, wheels spinning in the air. I went around to find Scott pitching horseshoes. So in this moment, we hear a little bit of the brothers, and we can hear this misogynistic statement, a sexist comment about girls, and also indication of like how clueless they really are about girls. And so we get a little bit of sense of their ignorance, and just you also get to sort of see and hear what teenage boys at this particular time period sound like. This is probably back in the 80s or 90s when this exchange is happening. And so then he goes over to his friend's house, who's an Okie. And so again, from one space to the next, we can kind of see a difference in the generations, but also in the I guess you could say in the language. Again, we're talking about discourse and the differences in the different spaces. And with the brothers, they say something vulgar, something that he would have never said in front of his mother. And then he goes and says, I picked up a set of rusty ones and joined him while we played. We talked about school and friends and record albums. The horseshoes scuffed up dirt, sometimes ringing the iron that threw out a meager shadow like a sundial. After 3 argued over games, we pulled 2 oranges apiece from his tree and started down the alley, still talking school and friends and record album. We pulled more oranges from the alley and talked about who we would marry. No offense, Scott, I said with an orange slice in my mouth, but I would never marry an Okie. We walked in step, almost touching, with a sled of shadows dragging behind us. No offense, Gary, Scott said, but I would never marry a Mexican. I looked at him. A fang of orange slice showed from his munching mouth. I didn't think anything of it. He had his girl, and I had mine, but our 7th grade vision was the same: to marry, get jobs, buy cars, and maybe a house if we had the money left over. And so in this paragraph now, we see where Gary Soto is going. First, we hear the first generation, the older generation, the grandmother, and then the mother, and then now the brothers. And now we go over to that space where he is not allowed to date, right, to his friends. And it's described as Okie. And so some of you may not even know what Okie is, but we're starting to get a description of that from description of the small aluminum trailer. And the flipped over on the freeway, so wheels spinning in the air. So you get a sense of social class. And then you also get the reference of the horseshoes. And so this is common in sort of seen here in Fresno, where you have more of this kind of rural America, kind of agrarian type of community. And there are several horse ranches out here, for instance. There are rodeos here and so forth. So we're getting a sense of what the environment's like, but also a little bit of the class level as well. And then also too, we see how these two different friends, how they're just accepting what their parents and grandparents have told them about what is important in life, what is valuable in life. And we see how this is kind of shaping their worldview at the time. And we talked about our future lives until, to our surprise, we were on the downtown mall 2 miles from home. We bought a bag of popcorn at Penny's and sat on a bench near the fountain watching Mexican and Okie girls pass. "That one's mine," I pointed with my chin when a girl with eyebrows arched into black rainbows ambled by. "She's cute," Scott said about a girl with yellow hair and a mouth full of gum. We dreamed aloud, our chins busy pointing at girls. We agreed that we couldn't wait to become men and lift them onto our laps. And again, we're getting these like kind of vulgar images of what they assume girls are supposed to do in their lives. And women in this story are being objectified. They don't even have a name, right? And it's just she's cute and just basically fulfilling a single job, that is to make babies. And then he goes and says, "But the woman I married was not Mexican, but Japanese. It was a surprise to me. For years I went about wide-eyed in my search for the brown girl in a white dress at a dance. I searched the playground at the baseball diamond. When the girls raced for grounders, their hair bounced like something that couldn't be caught. When they sat together in the lunchroom, heads pressed together, I knew they were talking about us Mexican guys. I saw them and dreamed them. I threw my face into my pillow, making up sentences that were good as in the movies." Okay, so I'm going to stop here. And the last thing I want to say is now we see halfway through this essay, this transition, like, whoa, he did not fulfill his grandmother and mother's wishes to marry Mexican. And so we are left questioning, why did he defy his mother's and grandmother's wishes? Sort of what led to he stepping outside of his cultural bubble. And also you see in this incident with the descriptions of like looking at the baseball diamond and looking for girls in the lunchroom and so forth, that he made an earnest effort. But he's dissatisfied about something. And so we are going to find out how he attempts to answer those questions. And so for the rest of the essay, read through the rest of the essay, and your job is then to now analyze the remaining paragraphs, again talking about the choices that he is making. You can talk about individual words he chooses and why. You can talk about a particular piece of dialogue and what effect that creates. So again, the choices he's making and the impact that's having on the reader and how that's impacting the essay as a whole. So that's what you want to accomplish. So I will add the PDF to the next part of the voice thread, and again answer any of these 2 questions and any of these 2 questions about the strategies and structures. And I look forward to hearing your responses.